O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter from the stormy blast, and our eternal home. I've now been a skeptic about God for more years than I firmly believed. And that hymn lifts my spirit, comforts me, and brings tears to my eyes every time. The palpable experience of faith that the song evokes remains, even though my theological perspectives have shifted over the years. Even now, while singing in a nearly empty sanctuary, I can feel the memory of singing with the crowd as the deep bass of the organ moves through us all. Perhaps some of you share similar memories or experiences of this hymn. Perhaps others have never heard this hymn before, or hearing it again today, you feel only dismay towards a theology you can no longer embrace. Your thoughts and feelings towards this hymn don't really matter that much. What does matter is that you have something in your life akin to this song. We all need sources of comfort, hope, and shelter when life gets stormy and the days are bad. And we are in a storm. Last week, I received an email for clergy that shared 4 stages of crisis response as developed by researchers at Harvard Medical School and the Ohio State Trauma Recovery Program. In summary, the author, Susan Nienbar, describes the stages as 1, heroic, the stage of individuals banding together to determine how to survive. The crisis brings a collective surge of cortisol and adrenaline. Then honeymoon. In reaction to the initial success and the feel-good response, people feel like they are in the same boat. And then disillusionment. As individuals begin to feel emotionally and physically exhausted, the hypervigilance of earlier days can become irritation, rage, or despair. Scientists believe the disillusionment is the result of a hormonal overload on the body. And finally, fatigue. Because the human body cannot sustain high levels of cortisol and adrenaline, we crash or burn out. A person can feel either triggered or withdrawn. A sense of pessimism and meaninglessness can set in. People may engage in risky, harmful behaviors to themselves or to others. What about you? How are you doing today? With more than 6 months of the pandemic and a rising wave of new infections, we are clearly past the start of a short-term struggle. According to Dr. Kerstin Koenen, a professor of psychiatric epidemiology at the Harvard School of Public Health, we are living with a level of chronic stress akin to, quote, other chronic stress, severe stressors with no obvious end point, more similar to long-term conflicts and war or displacement in refugee camps. With all that stress, how do we find comfort? For millennia, religious and spiritual life has been a source of comfort for innumerable people. Admittedly, religion has also contributed to its fair share of suffering, and it's also been designated as a tool of oppression, the opiate of the masses. But for many religious sources, we have also learned to pray or to meditate, to express our gratitude, to reflect on what matters, and to support one another. Our own First Parish Covenant calls us to many of these things, to seek meaning, to care for one another, and to work together for a better world. These things matter, especially now. In this topsy-turvy service of reordered elements, I wanted to play with the service order to reflect a bit of how we might be feeling and to demonstrate how even so, when things are turned upside down and all around, we still might find what we need. Although the typical order is rearranged, the elements we expect are all there. I see this as a kind of metaphor for how our lives are right now. For many, life feels jostled about and out of sync from what it's supposed to be. In many ways, in some ways, the familiar elements are there. We eat meals, we brush our teeth, we go for a walk or a bike ride. We gather for worship on Sundays. We connect with friends and family. And yet, how we do many of these things is different. It's a jumble of the familiar and the unfamiliar. Such a mixed up life can feel disorienting. Navigating the changes can be exhausting. How do we cope? When I imagine singing, "O God, our help in ages past," shoulder to shoulder in a packed sanctuary, I am comforted most by the experience of a shared faith. Singing those lyrics together conveys both the honest recognition that life could be stormy and the hope that we could make it through. Today, I wonder if the people's hope in singing that resided not only in a sense of God, but also with the connections of the gathered community. Or to take it another step, what if God was the manifestation of hope and goodness in all those people? What if God, rather than an external and separate being, emerges as an energy that can arise all around us, even within us? In our religious tradition, we leave space for different understandings of God, as well as different methods and means of renewing our spirits and finding meaning. We do this out of love for each other, leaving space to think and believe differently, to be different. As both the song you heard Matt and Joan sing and the reading by RK and Kate, our religious tradition bears a particular character. We aim to leave space for difference, to tear down walls between people, to seek what is good and joyful in life and humanity. At its best, our religious tradition enables people to show up as their fully human selves and to be welcomed in and loved. In a time of crisis, I suspect that being our fully human self means that we are not always doing great, that sometimes we are having a horrible, terrible, very bad day. In many ways, the relentlessness of the pandemic can break us open, can leave us feeling vulnerable and even wounded. I feel wounded by the losses of this pandemic. I feel broken open in a way that I have only once before in my life felt. This is hard, to have our congregational life turned upside down, to not be physically together, to not sing together. It is hard to be physically distant from family and friends, to be so regularly uncomfortable and anxious when outside our homes. And at the same time, the drumbeat of demand for Black lives to matter as much as white lives leaves me, and I know many of you who also identify as white, with deep questions. Could the chronic stress, discomfort, and fear I feel now be somewhat like what it feels like to be Black in the US all the time? Could it be that I've been comfortable and free of fear in ways I've never even noticed because I'm white? Throughout these weeks of pandemic and protest, I have wrestled as your minister about how to walk the line between offering comfort and hope in a time of crisis, while also challenging us who are white to consider difficult topics such as white supremacy and the injustices done to Indigenous peoples. You might have heard the quip that a minister's job is to afflict the comfortable and to comfort the afflicted. Well, what happens when we're all feeling afflicted? But at the same time, what if many of us have comforts of shelter, financial stability, citizenship, and racial privilege? Perhaps you feel I've leaned too far one way or the other. Maybe I have. This is my own humanity coming through as I wrestle with how to be a minister in this pandemic. We're all trying to figure out how to navigate our topsy-turvy world. Furthermore, many of us are feeling crisis fatigue. We're exhausted. Some may feel withdrawn, others may feel irritable. We've all known better days, and I suspect nights with better sleep. To survive this, the crisis researchers suggest that we be intentional about how we spend our energy, that we choose our battles, and that we don't forget to also focus on what brings us joy and hope. We all need time to care for ourselves, and we all need support. But if we're all a bit broken and wounded, who is left to do the supporting and caring? What if we don't need to have it all together to offer support to others? What if we can just do what we can as we are? What if we piece together a network of care based on what people can offer? A bit later in the service, you'll hear a reading to this effect from the book, There's No Good Card for This, by Kelsey Crow and Emily McDowell. I recommend this book for its very concrete suggestions of how to help others. Sometimes we listen, sometimes we mow the lawn, sometimes we just send a text or make a call. Sometimes we leave flowers, sometimes we help with dinner, sometimes we hand over some money. We each trust ourselves to do what we can, both what we're good at and what we're capable of. And we ask for help. We reach out for needs we might have to friends through the social listserv, to me, Kate, Alex, or the lay ministers. We all do what we can as the topsy-turvy, wounded human beings that we are right now can do, okay? Because this is a hard time, and we all need sources of comfort amidst the crisis. Providing that kind of care and meaningful connection has long been part of the work of religious communities. I hope that we can continue to be that for one another. And as we do, perhaps we can find shelter in a shared faith in the spirit of goodness and love within and among us. A shelter some of us just might call God. So may it be. Amen.